All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a story that is, frankly, just miraculous. We're talking about a teenager who defied absolutely impossible odds right in the heart of the Amazon. It's a crazy story of survival, sheer willpower, and honestly, the power of just having the right knowledge when you need it the most. So let's just dive right into it. 92. That's how many people were on what was supposed to be a completely routine flight over the Peruvian rainforest. You know, just ordinary people, families, travelers, all heading to wherever they needed to go. But here's the number that really gets you: 1. Out of all 92 passengers, a young girl named Juliane was the sole survivor. Just 1. I mean, how does a single person walk away from a catastrophe that claimed literally everyone else? Well, the answer is terrifying, but it's also incredibly inspiring. Okay, Section 1, the 2-mile fall. Let's look at how this mid-air disaster actually started. So Juliane and her mother were sitting together on this flight when the unthinkable happens. The plane suddenly flies directly into this massive, violent thunderstorm. It gets struck by lightning, and in an instant, literally an instant, the aircraft completely disintegrates. It just breaks apart right there in midair. Now, the physics of what happens next are they're terrifying. Juliane is still strapped into her 3-passenger seat row. She's sucked right out of the disintegrating plane and falls 2 entire miles through the sky, plunging straight down toward the Amazon. But in this unbelievable twist of fate, the thick, dense canopy of the jungle trees miraculously breaks her fall. It acted kind of like a giant natural net. She survived this 2-mile drop, but understandably, she was knocked out cold. That brings us to Section 2, alone in the Amazon. Waking up totally isolated. I want you to really think about this contrast for a second. Imagine going from the absolute, deafening terror and chaos of a plane breaking apart around you to waking up the next day in total, eerie silence on the jungle floor. Complete isolation. And as her mind finally starts to clear, this horrifying realization sets in. Her mom and everyone else on board, they were gone. And the physical toll she's dealing with before she even takes a single step, it's brutal. She wakes up with a broken collarbone. She's got a deep, bleeding gash in her arm, and her right eye is completely swollen shut from the trauma. Oh, and remember, she is entirely alone in literally one of the most unforgiving environments on the entire planet. Which leads us into Section 3, Rules of the Jungle. Choosing knowledge over panic. You see, Juliane actually had this hidden advantage. She was the daughter of 2 biologists who ran a remote research station deep in the jungle. So instead of just giving in to sheer terror, which, let's be honest, most of us would do, she made a choice. She remembered the crucial rules her parents taught her about the jungle. She chose applied knowledge instead of panic. Rule number 1 for finding civilization: map out the water flow. She managed to find this small spring, and she knew exactly what to do. She decided to follow it, knowing that tiny trickles eventually feed into streams, right? And streams inevitably lead to rivers. And down in the Amazon, rivers are basically the highways. That is where you're going to find human settlements. Then there's her second rule, which is all about where to actually walk. The jungle floor is packed with dense brush, incredibly dangerous spiders, venomous snakes, jaguars, the whole shebang. To avoid becoming prey, she knew she couldn't walk on land, so she chose to wade directly down the middle of the riverbed. But, even the water has hidden dangers, so she used a stick to constantly probe the water ahead of her, checking for stingrays and piranhas before taking literally every single step. Moving on to Section 4, Enduring the Elements. This was a grueling test. The conditions out there were unimaginably brutal. I mean, for over a week, her absolute only source of calories was a single, small bag of candy she scavenged from the crash site. That's it. Meanwhile, the weather never stops punishing her. It's swinging from sweltering tropical heat to freezing torrential rain. And honestly, worst of all, that deep gash in her arm got dangerously infected. It got to the point where maggots had actually started to infest the open wound. It is almost impossible to comprehend enduring that kind of brutality for so long. Just look at the gap between day 2 and day 10. That's 10 whole days navigating the treacherous Amazon, fighting off horrific infection and starvation, all while barely remaining conscious. She was walking the absolute razor's edge between life and death.
And that brings us to Section 5, the final miracle, a glimmer of hope.
So by the 10th day, her strength it's gone. She was mostly drifting down a larger river at this point, nearly totally defeated, basically surrendering to the current. But then, breaking through the dense green of the riverbank, civilization finally appears. Miraculously, she spots a small, moored boat, and right nearby on the bank, a rough logging shelter. And even on the absolute brink of passing out, she still had this remarkable presence of mind. She remembered a specific trick her father used back at the research station for treating infected wounds on cattle. She literally dragged herself to the boat, extracted a bit of gasoline directly from the engine, and poured it right onto her arm. I mean, it must have been agonizingly painful, but it worked. It successfully cleaned the maggots out of her wound. Having done literally everything humanly possible to save herself, she finally just collapsed and rested in the shelter overnight. And then, finally, the rescue. The very next day, a group of Peruvian loggers returned to their shelter. You can only imagine their absolute shock. I mean, they couldn't believe their eyes. They had found a lone, heavily injured teenager deep in the heart of the unforgiving jungle. They immediately treated her wounds, fed her what little they had, and took her on a several-hour boat ride down the river to a local hospital. They finally brought her back to the safety of the modern world. As we wrap up this explainer, we have to return to the tragic reality of the flight she fell from. 92 souls were on board that plane when the lightning struck and plunged them into the abyss. And we return to that single number, 1. We return to Juliane. You know, it wasn't just a miracle of physics that saved her during that 2-mile drop. It was her absolute refusal to panic. It was her ability to rely on the rules her parents taught her. Wading through the riverbed, testing for stingrays, mapping the water flow, treating her own wounds with engine fuel. That is what kept her alive against completely impossible odds. So I want to leave you with this final thought. True survival isn't just about luck. It's about holding on to what you know when everything else falls apart. If you were forced to fall 2 miles from the sky into the vast, unforgiving unknown, would you let panic take over? Or would you remember the rules? Something to think about.